They say a man dies twice. Once when his heart stops beating, and once when his name is spoken for the last time. But Dutch Schultz never really died. Not in the way men are supposed to die. He combusted. He shattered. And on the night of October 23, 1935, in a dingy back room of the Palace Chop House in Newark, New Jersey, something far worse than death came for him. He wasn't just shot that night. He was erased. But long before the bullets tore through his gut, Dutch Schultz had already lost something far more dangerous to lose in his world. His mind. And when a gangster loses his mind, everyone around him starts counting their final breaths. This is the story of a man who built an empire on fear, only to become the thing he used to control others. A man so paranoid, so unstable, so consumed by his own darkness that even the Mafia, the organization that invented loyalty through terror, decided he had to go. Because Dutch Schultz didn't just break the rules. He became unpredictable. And in the underworld, unpredictable men don't get warnings. They get bullets. His real name was Arthur Simon Flegenheimer, a name that carried no weight, no menace, no respect. So he buried it and became Dutch Schultz, a name that sounded like a punch to the jaw. By the time Prohibition choked America in the 1920s, Dutch had already learned the only lesson the Bronx ever taught him: take what you want or die trying. He wasn't born into the Mafia. He had no Italian blood, no family connections, no inherited power. He was Jewish, scrappy, and vicious, and that made him hungrier than anyone else. While other gangsters played politics and kissed rings, Dutch simply took. He seized beer trucks. He controlled speakeasies. He burned down rival operations and didn't bother hiding the bodies. His business strategy was simple: cooperate or get carried out. Within a few years, he controlled most of the illegal beer flow in the Bronx and Harlem. His empire was worth millions. He wore expensive suits, drove luxury cars, and dined in the finest underground clubs. But beneath the tailored fabric and polished shoes, something darker was growing. Dutch Schultz didn't just want money. He wanted submission. And anyone who didn't bow didn't last long. Dutch had a reputation even among killers. He was cold, efficient, and disturbingly quick to rage. Other mobsters calculated, they planned, they negotiated. Dutch erupted. Stories spread through the streets like whispered prayers. Men who crossed him weren't just killed, they were made examples of. Some were beaten so badly their own mothers couldn't recognize them. Others simply vanished, their names erased from memory like chalk in the rain. One of his enforcers once made a small mistake. A delivery was late, a payment short by a few dollars. Dutch didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just walked up to the man in front of a crowded room, looked him in the eyes, and said, "You think I'm stupid?" Then he pulled out a gun and shot him in the stomach. The man didn't die right away. He bled out slowly on the floor while Dutch finished his drink, chatting with others as if nothing had happened. When someone finally asked if they should call a doctor, Dutch shrugged. "He'll figure it out." That was the thing about Dutch Schultz. He didn't need a reason to hurt you. He just needed a feeling, and his feelings changed like weather in a storm. Even his closest allies started sleeping with one eye open. By the early 1930s, Dutch had moved beyond beer. Prohibition was dying, and he needed something more permanent. So he took over Harlem's numbers racket, a lottery system run by black entrepreneurs that generated millions. But Dutch didn't ask permission. He didn't negotiate. He walked into their offices with armed men and made it clear, "Work for me, or I burn everything you love." Most complied. Those who didn't were found in alleys or not found at all. Dutch's numbers operation became one of the most profitable illegal enterprises in New York. Money poured in daily. He had cops on payroll, politicians in his pocket, and judges who looked the other way. For a moment, it seemed like Dutch Schultz had built something untouchable. But his paranoia was growing. He started seeing betrayal everywhere, in his accountant's eyes, in the way his driver hesitated before opening the car door, in the silence of his own men when he entered a room. He began carrying multiple guns. He trusted no one. He would hold meetings in different locations every time, never announcing where until the last minute. He'd show up hours early, watching, waiting, convinced someone was always planning to kill him. And maybe they were. Because the more unstable he became, the more people wanted him gone. Then came the one enemy Dutch couldn't shoot his way out of, the federal government. Thomas Dewey, a young and ambitious prosecutor, had made it his mission to destroy organized crime in New York, and Dutch Schultz was at the top of his list. Why didn't care about street justice or old mob codes? He had subpoenas, wiretaps, and tax evasion charges. He was going to do to Dutch what the feds had done to Al Capone, lock him away not for murder but for unpaid taxes. Dutch went into hiding. He fled to New Jersey, moved between safe houses, grew a beard, changed his appearance. For the first time in his life, Dutch Schultz was running. And he hated it. His empire was slipping. His men were nervous. Other mobsters started circling, smelling weakness. Dutch became obsessed with one thought: kill Thomas Dewey. If the prosecutor was dead, the case would fall apart. The fear would return. The empire would stabilize. So Dutch made a decision. He was going to murder a federal prosecutor in broad daylight. But there was a problem. Killing a prosecutor wasn't just dangerous, it was suicidal. Every law enforcement agency in the country would descend on the Mafia like a plague. It would shatter the fragile peace mobsters had built with politicians and cops. It would bring war to every street corner. The Commission, the ruling body of the American Mafia, held a meeting. Lucky Luciano, Mayor Lansky, Frank Costello, the most powerful men in organized crime. And they all agreed Dutch Schultz had lost his mind. They told him no. They ordered him to stand down. They warned him that killing Dewey would destroy them all. But Dutch didn't care. He screamed at them. He accused them of cowardice. He said he'd do it himself if he had to. And that's when they realized the truth. Dutch Schultz wasn't just unstable. He was a liability. And liabilities in the Mafia don't get second chances. The Palace Chop House. On the night of October 23, 1935, Dutch Schultz walked into the Palace Chop House in Newark with 3 of his men. It was a routine meeting, or so he thought. They sat in a back room. Smoke curled through the dim light. The sound of glasses clinking and low voices filled the air. Dutch went to the bathroom. And that's when the shooters walked in. 2 men, guns drawn, faces covered. They didn't say a word. They just started firing. Dutch's men were hit first. One collapsed instantly. Another tried to reach for his gun but was cut down before he could raise it. The third fell across the table, blood pooling beneath him. Dutch stumbled out of the bathroom, clutching his stomach. He'd been shot, the bullet tearing through his abdomen. He staggered toward the bar, eyes wide, confused, trying to understand what was happening. The shooters left as quickly as they came. Dutch collapsed. He didn't die right away. For 24 hours, Dutch Schultz lay in a hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness. Police sat by his side, notebooks ready, desperate for a confession, for names, for anything. But what came out of his mouth wasn't a confession. It was madness. He muttered about French-Canadian bean soup. He talked to his mother. He shouted about hidden money and secret enemies. He rambled about dice games and broken promises. His words were fragments of a life collapsing inward, a mind that had already shattered long before the bullets arrived. A boy has never wept nor dashed 1,000 kim. The chimney sweeps, talk to the sword. Mother is the best bet, and don't let Satan draw you too fast. The stenographer wrote it all down, trying to make sense of it, but there was no sense to make. Dutch Schultz, the man who once controlled an empire, who struck fear into the hearts of killers, was now babbling like a child lost in a nightmare. He died on October 24, 1935, at 8:35 p.m. His last words barely a whisper. "I want to pay, let them leave me alone." The streets didn't mourn him. His empire was carved up within days. Lucky Luciano absorbed his territories. Other mobsters claimed his rackets. His name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you lose control. The commission moved on. Thomas Dewey continued his crusade. The world kept turning. Dutch Schultz was buried quietly, attended by a handful of people. No grand funeral, no tearful speeches, just a hole in the ground and a name that would slowly fade into history. But the question lingered. What had driven him to that point? Was it the violence he'd inflicted for so long finally turning inward? Was it the paranoia of knowing everyone wanted him dead? Or had he always been broken, just waiting for the world to catch up? Maybe it didn't matter. Because in the end, Dutch Schultz didn't die from bullets. He died from fear. The same fear he'd used to build his empire. The same fear that had rotted him from the inside out. Years later, treasure hunters would search the Catskill Mountains, convinced that Dutch had buried millions before his death. They'd dig through forests, scan riverbeds, chase rumors passed down through generations. But they never found it. Maybe because it was never there. Or maybe because Dutch Schultz's real treasure wasn't money. It was the terror he left behind. The stories of a man consumed by his own darkness that even death couldn't fully erase him. A ghost that still haunts the alleys of the Bronx, the backrooms of old speakeasies, the whispered legends of a time when crime wore suits and shadows were always listening. Dutch Schultz didn't just lose his mind that night in Newark. He became it. A reminder that the monsters we create in this world are often the ones staring back at us in the mirror. And when you build your kingdom on fear, eventually, that fear comes home. It sits across from you at dinner. It follows you into the bathroom. It waits for you in the dark. And when it finally arrives, dressed in silence and smoke, you realize the truth too late. You were never the hunter. You were always the prey. The lights in the Palace Chop House went dark that night. But somewhere in the shadows, Dutch Schultz is still muttering. Still lost. Still trying to pay a debt that can never be settled. And if you listen closely on quiet nights in Newark, they say you can still hear him. Whispering about bean soup and broken dreams, and the terrible price of losing your mind in a world that never forgives.